"Dad, we're moving in." My son said it the way a man reads a weather report, no question mark anywhere in it. Two suitcases were already standing on my porch like they had been waiting there longer than he had, and behind him in my driveway, the hatch of his SUV was open with more bags stacked inside, and the porch light was falling on all of it. The luggage, my son's face, the woman beside him in a cream-colored coat holding a leather tote, and I understood, in the 2 seconds before I said anything at all, that the decision had been made somewhere else, in some other room, by people who had not thought it necessary to include me. I was 71 years old. It was 9:47 at night, and I had just been told on my own porch, under a light I had wired with my own hands, that my house was no longer entirely mine. Before I take you through what happened over the next 4 months, and I want to warn you, now it gets worse before it gets better. Let me say one thing. If you have ever stood in your own doorway feeling like a guest, or watched someone rearrange your life while smiling at you, then this story belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. Stay with me to the end. What happened at that 4th of July barbecue changed everything, and I'd like you to be there when it does. And if anything in this story finds you, tell me in the comments. I read them, and I'd be honored to hear what you carry. Now let me go back to the doorbell. It rang 3 times, not a polite ding-dong. 3 hard presses, one after another, like whoever stood out there had already decided their emergency was my responsibility. I'd been sitting in Eleanor's old recliner, the blue one with the worn armrest, where her hand used to rest when we watched game shows on Tuesday nights. She'd been gone almost 4 years by then. Some evenings I still sat in her chair, because the house felt less empty from that angle. My knees popped when I stood. My back gave me the sharp little warning it had been giving me since I turned 60. "All right," I muttered. "I'm coming." And then the door was open, and there they were. "For how long?" I asked. My son rubbed the back of his neck the way he'd done since he was 9 years old and had broken something. "Just a little while." Lee's situation got messy. His wife stepped forward before he could finish. "It'll be easier if we just get settled tonight. We're exhausted." She said it like I had invited them. I looked at Bradley, really looked at him. I waited for the explanation, the apology, anything that sounded like he remembered whose threshold he was standing on. He looked down and picked up a suitcase. That hurt more than the words, but he was my boy. 36 years old, sure. But in my mind, he was still the kid who fell asleep in the back seat after Little League, cleats muddy, hair stuck to his forehead. And I'd carry him in without waking him, because Eleanor said a sleeping child should never be woken by his own father. So I stepped aside. "Come on in." Vanessa smiled like I had passed a test. They rolled those suitcases across the rug. Eleanor picked out at a flea market outside Springboro, and straight down my hallway. I barely had the door closed when Vanessa reached into her tote and pulled out a sheet of paper. Not printer paper. Laminated, she handed it to me with both hands, the way you hand someone a diploma. "I made a basic house schedule," she said. "Just so everyone knows expectations. At the top, in neat black letters, house rules, breakfast ready by 6 a.m. Bathrooms cleaned every night, shirts pressed, dresses hung, not folded." For a second, I honestly thought it was a joke. I looked at my son. He was studying a suitcase handle, like it contained the answer to something. Vanessa tapped the page with one manicured finger. "Nothing unreasonable. Structure helps everyone." Something rose in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Disbelief with a hard edge on it. "This is for my house," I said. It wasn't quite a question, she smiled. "For all of us." I looked past her into the kitchen where Eleanor's recipe box still sat by the stove, the little wooden one with the lid that never closed right. I looked at the refrigerator, covered in photographs. Bradley missing his front teeth, Eleanor holding him at a state park with the wind in her hair, me with black hair and a tool belt, and the idiot confidence of a man who thinks the hard part is behind him. Then I looked back at that laminated sheet, and I smiled. "Well," I said, "that's organized?" Bradley let out a breath like he'd been holding it since Ohio. That night I gave them the guest room, fresh sheets, clean towels. I even carried one of the suitcases down the hall before my right hip reminded me that I was not 40. "Thanks, Dad," Bradley said quietly, when Vanessa went out to the car. I stopped in the hallway. "You okay?" He swallowed. "Yeah, just a rough month." I wanted to ask him what kind of rough month ends with a man's wife handing his father a chore list in his own living room. But he looked tired and ashamed, and I was tired too. And there is a particular cowardice that dresses itself up as patience. "Get some sleep," I said. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of other people living in my house. A drawer opening that I had not opened. Water running in a bathroom I had tiled myself in 1994. A low murmur of two voices behind a wall. And somewhere in that murmuring I heard something I did not want to name yet. They did not sound like guests. They sounded like owners. Here is a thing nobody tells you about losing your home. It does not happen all at once. Nobody walks in with a flag and plants it in your carpet. They move one mug, one chair, one photograph, one habit. And if you don't object fast enough, they file your silence away as permission and come back for more. The first morning, my coffee mugs were in a different cabinet. By lunch, the thermostat had gone from 70 to 74. By dinner, my Wi-Fi password was, in Vanessa's words, too hard to remember, so she had reset it. She told me the new one. It was her daughter's name and a birth year, because there was a child. I should have said so sooner. But I have noticed that when I tell this story, I keep putting her off. The way you save the one thing you can't afford to have anyone misunderstand. Lily was 7. She came in behind her parents that first night dragging a purple backpack with a broken zipper and a stuffed rabbit whose ear had been repaired so many times it had become a different color from the rest of him. She stopped in my hallway, looked up at me with her mother's exact face and her father's exact eyes, and said, "Are you the grandpa?" "I'm the grandpa," I said. "I've seen you in a picture." That is the sentence. If you want to understand everything that came after, that is the sentence. My granddaughter had seen me in a picture. Springboro is a 2-hour drive. I had held that child 4 times in 7 years. She put out her hand to shake mine, very formally, because somebody had taught her that. And then she said, "Your house smells like cookies." It didn't. Nothing in that house had smelled like cookies since Eleanor died. But I have thought about that sentence for 2 years now. And I have decided that a 7-year-old, walking into a strange house at 10 o'clock at night, frightened, said the kindest thing she could think of. She was being polite to me. She was the only one who was. "Well," I said, and my voice did something I wasn't expecting. "Then you'd better stay for a while." She slept in the small room at the end of the hall. Bradley's old room. I hadn't changed it much. I lay awake that first night thinking that there was a child under my roof again, and that if I had been asked, if anyone had thought to ask me, I would have said yes to all of it. Yes to the suitcases, yes to the whole crowd of them. All they had to do was ask. Nobody asked. That was the thing. Not once in 4 months did anybody ask. On the second day I came back from the grocery store and found Eleanor's recliner halfway across the living room. Bradley had one hand on the back of it. Vanessa stood nearby, pointing at the garage. "What's going on?" I asked. She turned with that bright smile. "We're just opening the space up. This chair is a little dated." I set the grocery bag on the counter. My hands were steady. I remember being surprised by that. "That was your mother's chair," I said to my son. He froze for half a second, and I saw the boy in him, the one who cried into my shirt at Eleanor's funeral, until my collar was soaked through, and I had to hold him up with both arms, because his legs had quit on him. Then Vanessa said, "We're not throwing it away, just storing it." Bradley looked at me, then he looked away. They moved it into the garage and put a tarp over it. That night the laminated house rules appeared on my refrigerator, stuck right over the picture of Eleanor, holding our son on his first Christmas. I stood there a long time. Then I slid the picture out to the side so I could still see her face, and I left the rules right where they were because I wanted to look at them every morning. I wanted to remember exactly what they said. At 6 o'clock the next morning I got up, not quietly. I started the old vacuum cleaner Eleanor bought around 1988. That thing sounds like a lawnmower eating gravel. I ran it right outside the guest room door. Then the washing machine. Then the coffee grinder. Then my kitchen radio, tuned to the classic country station. And Willie Nelson came down the hallway to meet the vacuum. The guest room door flew open. Vanessa stood there with her hair wild and her eyes narrow. "What are you doing?" I turned off the vacuum. "Morning. It's 6. I know what time it is." Bradley appeared behind her, rubbing his face. "Dad, come on." I leaned on the vacuum handle. "Well," I said, "I figured if we're all making rules now, I'd start with mine." Neither of them had anything. The coffee maker hissed behind me. For the first time since they'd arrived, my daughter-in-law did not have a ready answer, and I want to be honest with you, it felt good. Not righteous. Just good, in the small mean way that a man feels good when he finally gets a word in. Then a door opened at the end of the hall. and Lily came out in pajamas with her rabbit under one arm, and looked at the three of us standing there in the wreckage of 6 o'clock in the morning. "Is somebody in trouble?" she asked. Nobody answered her, and I turned the vacuum back off and I thought, "Careful, Walter. There is a child watching. Whatever this becomes, she is going to remember it." That evening, after they'd gone to their room, I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing my cup. The house had gone quiet except for the refrigerator, and then I heard her voice from down the hall, low but clear enough. "This place needs to stop feeling like your dad's house." I held the cup under the faucet until the water ran over my fingers and went cold. Bradley said something I couldn't catch. "No, I'm serious," she said. "If we're going to stay, things have to change." I turned off the faucet, and I understood something, standing there in the dark with a wet cup in my hand. They had not come to stay with me. They had come to take over. By the second week, Bradley was parking in my spot in the garage. He didn't ask. He just came home one evening from his sales job over in Beaver Creek and pulled his silver SUV into the left side, where my pickup had lived for 27 years. I opened the kitchen door and he was already stepping out, briefcase in hand. "Oh," he said, seeing me. "I figured it'd be easier. Vanessa has the driveway and you don't go out much at night." I looked past him at my truck, sitting outside under a cold March drizzle. "Is that right?" I said. He shifted the briefcase from one hand to the other. "I mean, just while we're here." Just while we're here. That became the magic phrase. It could justify anything. My cereal moved to a lower cabinet because this pantry needs flow. My bath mat replaced because it looked tired. Eleanor's recliner pushed farther back into the garage, with 2 plastic storage bins stacked in front of it, as if burying it deep enough would make it stop mattering. One Saturday I came in from trimming the hedges, and there was a white sectional sofa where the recliner used to be. Delivery tags still hanging off one arm. Vanessa stood in the middle of my living room with her phone out, taking pictures. "Doesn't this open everything up?" she said. I wiped my hands on a rag. "Where'd it come from?" "Online. Good sale." Bradley stood at the window, studying the receipt like it was in another language. "You two buying furniture," I said, "for a place you're only staying in for a little while." Vanessa laughed lightly. "It's still useful, Walter. We can take it with us later." She always called me Walter. Never Dad. Never Mr. Hargrove. Just Walter, like a coworker she was managing without wanting to offend. I went out to the garage that afternoon. Eleanor's chair was there under the tarp with one wooden leg showing. I pulled the tarp back and stood looking at it. The fabric was faded on the arms. There was a coffee stain on the left cushion from the night. Eleanor laughed so hard at something on television that she poured half a mug into her own lap and then laughed harder about that. I never cleaned it all the way out, didn't want to. I lowered myself onto a paint bucket beside it and sat there until the light changed. That is where my neighbor found me. Gerald Kowalski had lived next door for 22 years. Retired deputy, Montgomery County. Tall, narrow man with a gray mustache and a way of noticing things you'd rather he didn't. He knocked twice on the open garage frame. "You hiding from company or hiding evidence?" "Both, maybe." He stepped in and nodded at the chair. That didn't move itself. No. Eleanor would have put somebody in the ground for moving that chair. Despite myself, I laughed, once. She'd have started with a lecture, then gone from there. Gerald leaned against my workbench. "They settling in okay?" I could hear the question under the question. "They're settling in," I said. He looked toward the house. Through the kitchen window, Vanessa was moving around like she'd been born in it. Bradley stood beside her nodding at something on her phone. Gerald followed my eyes. "People don't take a house all at once," he said. "They make you feel like a guest first." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to answer. He was right, and we both knew he was right. And there is a particular loneliness in having your neighbor understand your situation before you're willing to understand it yourself. A few days later, Vanessa invited another couple over for dinner. She told me at 4 in the afternoon, while I was standing at the mailbox. "Just so you know," she said, "some friends from my office are coming by around 7. Nothing fancy." I looked down at the electric bill in my hand, the one with my name on it. That would have been good to know earlier. "Oh, it's casual. Don't worry. Don't worry." I have come to believe that when somebody tells you not to worry about something happening inside your own home, you should begin worrying immediately. I made myself scarce, mostly because I didn't feel like sitting through small talk in my own living room, while Vanessa performed her version of family life for an audience. Around 8, I came in through the back door with a bag of trash from the garage. I had on my old work jacket and a pair of gloves. A man I didn't know was standing near the kitchen island with a glass of wine. He glanced at me, the way you look at a piece of furniture that's been moved, and said, "Hey, are you the handyman?" The room went still for half a breath. Vanessa's smile twitched, and Bradley looked at me. I want you to understand what I was waiting for. It would have taken him 3 seconds. 3 seconds and 8 words. That's my dad, this is his house. That's all. I have run the arithmetic on that moment more times than a sane man should, and it always comes out to 3 seconds. He stared at the floor, and Vanessa gave a small laugh and said, "Oh, that's Walter, not my father-in-law. Not Bradley's dad. Not the man who owns the ground you're standing on. Just Walter," delivered in a tone that let everyone in the room file me correctly and move on. The man flushed. "Sorry, I didn't realize." "No harm," I said. "But there was harm. It just didn't make any noise." I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed and looked at Eleanor's picture on the dresser. She's standing in front of a lake somewhere, hair blown sideways, laughing at me, because I never could take a straight photograph in my life. "I don't know what happened to him," I said. The picture didn't answer. They never do. But sitting there in the dark with a party going on underneath me, something surfaced that I had spent 11 years holding under. Their wedding, late September. Eleanor was still alive then, still had 4 years left, though none of us knew the arithmetic yet. There was a moment at the reception I'd forgotten it, or I'd made myself forget it, when Vanessa's mother was talking about the house Bradley grew up in, and Vanessa said, with a wine glass in her hand and a smile on her face, "It's got good bones. It just needs somebody with a vision." Everyone laughed. It was a joke. It was obviously a joke. Eleanor didn't laugh. I remember that now. Eleanor set down her fork and looked at that girl for about 2 seconds longer than was comfortable. And then she picked her fork back up and said nothing at all. And later that night in the car she said, "Walter, do you like her?" And I said what fathers say. I said, "It's not my job to like her." And Eleanor looked out the window at the highway going by and said, "That's not what I asked." 11 years. I had 11 years of warning, and I filed it under, "My wife is being protective," and I never took it out again. That is my confession, and I'm making it early, because I don't want you thinking I'm the hero of this story. A man who sees the water rising for 11 years and calls it weather is not a hero. He's just a man who preferred not to know. The real answer, the one I couldn't file away, came 3 nights after the dinner party. I'd gotten up around 11:30, because old men and full glasses of iced tea after dinner are a poor combination. On my way back from the bathroom, I saw light under Bradley and Vanessa's door. Their voices were low. I wasn't trying to listen. That's what I told myself for about 4 seconds. And then I stopped telling myself that, and I stood there in the dark hallway and listened on purpose. "We can't keep pretending this is temporary," Vanessa said. "I know. We need him to sign before he changes his mind." My hand closed on the hallway rail. Bradley's voice dropped. "I don't want to put Dad somewhere." A pause. And then Vanessa, patient as a nurse. "Not a nursing home. Don't make it sound ugly. Just somewhere smaller. He doesn't need all this space." All this space. The house Eleanor and I paid off 1 overtime shift at a time, 34 years of it. The house where Bradley took his first steps. In the hallway I was standing in, barefoot, at 11:30 at night, at the age of 71. The house where I held my wife's hand through the last winter of her life and told her lies about the spring. "He doesn't need all this space." "He's not going to like it," Bradley said. "He'll adjust," she said. "He always does." He always does. Of all of it, the rules, the chair, the handyman, all of it, that was the sentence that went in the deepest, because it was true. That was the terrible part. She had studied me for 11 years, and she had my number exactly. I always did adjust. I adjusted my way right out of my own living room, and I called it being a good father. I went back to my bedroom and did not sleep. It was Lily who put the last piece in. 2 mornings later I was making her breakfast. I'd been doing that quietly, because nobody else was up at 6:30 and a child ought to eat. She was at the kitchen table with her rabbit sitting in the chair beside her like a guest. "Grandpa," she said, "when you move out, can I have your room? It has the good window." I set the pan down very carefully. "Who told you I was moving out, sweetheart?" She kicked her feet under the chair. She was working on a piece of toast with the crusts cut off, which is not how I make toast, but I had learned. "Mommy said this is all going to be ours soon. She said I could pick a wall color." She looked up, suddenly worried in the way children get when they sense they've walked into something. Is that not true? I looked at my granddaughter, 7 years old, holding a rabbit with a mismatched ear, waiting for her grandfather to tell her what was true. And here is what I want to say about that moment. Everything I did afterward, the lawyer, the photographs, the barbecue, all of it, people have told me it was revenge. It wasn't. I want to be precise about this, because precision is the only thing I have left to offer you. Standing in that kitchen with a pan in my hand, I was not thinking about my house. I was thinking that somebody had sat that child down and told her a story about her grandfather that was not true, and that she was going to grow up inside that story, and that one day she would be 40 years old, and she would remember it as the truth, unless somebody who loved her put something else in its place. I put the toast on her plate. Eat your breakfast, I said. We'll talk about walls later. She ate. She talked about a girl at school named Priya who could do a cartwheel. I stood at the stove with my back to her, and I let my face do whatever it needed to do, and then I put it away. At 6:15 the next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my first cup of coffee, looking at that laminated sheet still stuck to my refrigerator. Eleanor's Christmas picture had been pushed to the side again. My hands shook a little when I picked up the phone. Not from fear. From making a decision I had been avoiding for 11 years. I scrolled to a number I hadn't called in almost a year. Fletcher and Vance Estate Law, the receptionist said. This is Walter Hargrove. I need to speak with Diane Fletcher. A few minutes later, Diane came on the line. Her voice was calm and familiar. Walter, is everything all right? I looked down the hallway where my son and his wife and my granddaughter were still sleeping. No, I said. But I'm done pretending it is. There was a pause. Is this about the trust we set up after Eleanor passed? I closed my eyes. Yes, I said. I think it's time. I expected Diane Fletcher to tell me I was overreacting. Lawyers are supposed to be the cold water. Instead, she said, come by the office this afternoon. Bring whatever you think matters. Even if it feels small. That sentence stayed with me all morning. Even if it feels small. Funny how the little things are always the first honest sign that something large has gone wrong. By the time I drove to her office downtown, I had a grocery bag on the passenger seat. Inside it were things I never imagined carrying into an attorney's office. The laminated house rules. Photographs I'd taken with my phone. Copies of text messages Bradley had accidentally sent to the family group before deleting them. A receipt for a sectional sofa delivered to my address. And one old photograph of Eleanor, sitting in her blue recliner with a cup of coffee, smiling at whoever was holding the camera, which was me. Diane went through all of it without interrupting. She's about 60, silver-haired, reading glasses she keeps pushing up with one knuckle. She'd done Eleanor's paperwork. She'd sat with us in the hospital. Finally, she folded her hands. You're fortunate, she said. 4 years ago, after Eleanor passed, you agreed to put the house into an irrevocable trust instead of waiting. You told me at the time you didn't want your son burdened with probate. That hasn't changed. No. What's changed, she said, is that you now need protection while you're still alive, which is a different problem than the one we were solving. I leaned back in the chair. There was a window behind her, and a maple tree in it, and I remember watching that tree while I said the next part. I don't want revenge, Diane. I know. I just want my house to feel like mine again. She smiled, and it was a sad smile. That's a very different thing, and it's harder. Revenge you can do in an afternoon. She explained it in plain English. The trust already owned the house. I had the absolute right to live there for the rest of my life. Nobody could force a sale. Nobody could pressure me into signing ownership away, for the simple reason that I did not personally own it to sign. But we could strengthen the language around coercion, unauthorized occupancy, and attempts to manipulate estate decisions. We could document, we could make the record so clean that no one could ever say it was a confused old man's whim. Will this hurt Bradley forever? I asked. Diane didn't answer right away. I appreciated that. Anyone who answers that question quickly is lying to you. No, she said finally. But refusing to set a boundary might. Walter, I've done this work for 31 years. I have never once seen a family destroyed by a clear line. I've seen dozens destroyed by the absence of one. Driving home, I stopped at a red light and realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired of walking through my own kitchen like a man who needed a pass. Tired of pretending every insult was an accident. Tired, most of all, of waiting for my son to spontaneously become the man I remembered, as if a person could be reasoned back into himself by being tolerated hard enough. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a delivery truck parked outside. Two men were unloading boxes marked Home Office Caution. I carried my grocery bag in. Vanessa met me in the hallway. "Oh, perfect," she said. "Could you sign for these?" "What are they?" "Desk furniture. For where?" She smiled. "The den, our den." Then she laughed as if I'd told a joke. "You're funny," I signed. Not because I approved, because I wanted the receipt. That evening Gerald wandered over with 2 bottles of root beer. He hasn't touched alcohol since he retired from the department. He won't say why, and I've never asked. "Thought I'd rescue you," he said. We sat on the back patio while the sun went down behind the maples. Neither of us talked for a while. That's the great luxury of a friend past a certain age. The silence isn't work. Finally he said, "How bad?" I handed him a bottle. "They're measuring rooms." He nodded. "They're buying furniture." He nodded again. "They're talking about moving me somewhere smaller." That made him look at me. They actually said that. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting once, which is the single most underrated skill a human being can have. When I finished, he took a slow drink. "I spent 32 years answering family disputes," he said. "The ones that ended worst weren't about money. No, they were about respect." He pointed the bottle at my house. "Money's just the last thing left to take. They stopped respecting you long before anybody wanted your house." That landed harder than anything else anyone said to me in 4 months. The following week, Ruth Delaney called. Ruth had been Eleanor's closest friend for 30 years. The two of them taught Sunday school together, drove to Columbus for concerts, and conducted a decades-long feud about whether a pie crust should be made with butter or shortening that was never resolved and never intended to be. Ruth's in an assisted living place now over in Miamisburg. She calls me every couple of months and pretends it's about a recipe. We talked about nothing for 10 minutes. Then she said, "Walter, are you all right?" "Why?" "Because Carol told me your son moved in and you sound like a man reading from a card." I sat down, and I told Ruth Delaney the truth, more or less, because she is 84 years old and does not have time for the other thing. She was quiet for a while. "Do you know what Eleanor said to me?" she asked, near the end. "That last November." "No." "She was worried about Bradley." "Not about you. She never worried about you. She said you were too stubborn to be pitiable, which I believe was a compliment." Ruth laughed a little. She said, "Ruthie, my son is a kind boy with no spine, and someday somebody is going to use that against him, and Walter will let it happen because he loves him." I didn't say anything. She said, "The worst thing Walter could do is be patient." Ruth's voice went carefully steady. "I've been carrying that for 4 years, honey, and I didn't know what to do with it. I'm sorry. I should have called you sooner." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time with the phone in my hand. The worst thing Walter could do is be patient. She knew. She knew all of it. Sitting in that bed with the tubes and the terrible television, dying, she had run the whole thing forward in her mind and seen exactly where it would end. And the only person she couldn't warn was me, because she knew I'd tell her not to worry. The hardest evening came late in April. Rain tapped on the garage roof. I pulled back the tarp on Eleanor's recliner. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight. I sat down in it. The springs groaned the same way they always had, the same complaint in the same key, for 30 years. And for a few minutes I let myself miss her. Properly. Not the polite low-grade missing you do at a grocery store when you see a brand she liked. The other kind. "If you were here," I whispered, "you'd have known what to do." She didn't answer. But I remembered something she used to tell Bradley, whenever kids at school pushed him around. And she'd kneel down to his height in the kitchen and hold his chin. Being kind doesn't mean letting people walk through you. I sat in that garage a long time thinking about it, and I finally admitted the thing I had been walking around for 4 months, and maybe for 11 years. Maybe I hadn't been protecting my son. Maybe I'd only been protecting myself from the pain of confronting him. There's a difference. It's a big one, and every parent I have ever met has stood on the wrong side of it at least once. Something changed in me after that night. Not outside. Outside, I became easier than I'd ever been. Vanessa asked if I could make breakfast. Sure. She wanted shirts picked up from the cleaners. No problem. Bradley asked if I could wait for the cable technician. Happy to. And the more agreeable I became, the more careless they got. Vanessa stopped lowering her voice on phone calls. Bradley stopped looking guilty, which I noted and grieved and filed. Boxes kept arriving. Paint samples appeared on the dining room table like a rash. One evening I walked into the kitchen and found blueprints spread across the counter. Vanessa looked up. "Oh, don't worry. Just brainstorming." "For what?" she pointed. "The wall between the den and the living room. You're taking down a wall. If we stay long term," she caught herself a half second too late. Bradley looked at her. She forced a smile. "I mean, if." I nodded, and inside me another piece clicked into place. And I said nothing at all, because I had learned by then that the most useful thing in the world is a man everybody has stopped watching. But it was around then that my son did something I didn't expect. It was a Thursday. Vanessa was at a client meeting. I came in from the hardware store, and the garage door was up, and Bradley was standing in the garage with the tarp pulled halfway off his mother's chair. And he had a screwdriver in his hand, and one of the storage bins moved aside, and he was tightening the loose screw in the right arm, the one I'd been meaning to get to since 2019. He didn't hear me. I stood in the doorway and watched my son fix his mother's chair. When he saw me, he stood up too fast, like a kid caught with something. "It was loose," he said. "I know it was loose." We looked at each other across about 9 feet of concrete. "Dad," he started, and then a car door shut in the driveway, and I watched my son's face close like a store at closing time. He set the screwdriver down. He pulled the tarp back over the chair. He slid the storage bin back into place with his foot, quickly, and he was doing it before he'd even decided to do it, which is what frightened me most. Vanessa came in through the side door with her keys in her hand. She looked at Bradley. She looked at the tarp. She looked at the bin, which was 2 inches out of place. "What were you doing?" "Nothing," my son said. "Looking for the extension cord." She held his eyes a second longer than she needed to. Then she smiled at me. "Walter, did you eat?" And she went inside. Bradley stood there in the garage with his hands empty. I want to tell you that I was angry with him. I've told this story enough times now to know that's what people expect. But standing in that garage watching a 36-year-old man lie about a screwdriver, all I felt was a grief so complete it had gone quiet. Because he knew. That was the thing I finally understood. My son was not deceived. He was not confused. He was not being slowly convinced by a clever woman. He knew exactly what was happening in my house. He had known from the first night. He'd just decided that the price of stopping it was higher than the price of watching it. And that was worse. That was so much worse. Every few days I met with Diane, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. She never once encouraged me to humiliate my son. Quite the opposite. "Stay calm," she'd say. "Let the facts do the work. Facts don't need any help from your temper." So that's what I did. Every text, every receipt, every photograph. Nothing dramatic. Just a record, the way I'd kept records for 30 years as a union electrician. Because in my trade, a man who can't document his work is a man who eventually gets blamed for someone else's fire. One afternoon, Diane asked, "Do you have photographs of what the house looked like before they moved in?" I smiled for the first time in days. About 20 years worth. Then, in the middle of May, the last piece arrived. It arrived as the important things usually do, by accident. There's a woman named Denise Alvarado who sells real estate around here. I've known her since she was on the volleyball team with the daughter of a man I apprenticed with. She waved at me in the parking lot of the hardware store, and then she came over, and she had a look on her face I couldn't read. "Walter," she said, "can I ask you something awkward? Those are usually the good ones. Are you selling the house?" I stood there in that parking lot with a bag of wire nuts in my hand. "No," I said. "Why?" "Because your daughter-in-law had me out for a walkthrough about 3 weeks ago. Comparative market analysis." Denise's mouth had gone thin. "She said you'd asked her to handle it because you didn't want to deal with it yourself. She said you were," her words, "getting to that stage." I did not say anything for a while. Denise waited, which was decent of her. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. "I've been sick about it." She had a key. She had photographs of the interior on her phone. It never crossed my mind. "You didn't do anything wrong, Denise." I ran the numbers for her. I sent her a written CMA. She asked what it would appraise at with the wall between the den and the living room removed. Denise looked at me. "Walter," she asked me what the timeline would be on a probate sale. The hardware store parking lot. 11 in the morning. Sun on the asphalt. That is where I found out. Not probate. Probate means someone has died. She had asked a real estate agent how fast she could sell my house after I was dead. 3 weeks after she moved into it, while I was making her daughter's breakfast at 6:30 in the morning. Denise, I said, would you be willing to say all that to my attorney? In writing? She didn't hesitate. Give me the address. Some people surprise you. That is the other half of this story, and I don't want it to get lost. For every person in it who behaved badly, there was somebody like Denise Alvarado standing in a parking lot with a bag of mulch under one arm, refusing to look away. Diane read the CMA twice. She set it down. She took her glasses off, which I had learned meant something. Walter, she said, I want to be careful with you now. Go ahead. This isn't a woman who got carried away. This is a plan with a schedule. She tapped the paper. And the fact that she used your name to authorize it, that's not rudeness. That's a misrepresentation to a licensed professional. That has a name. What do we do? She was quiet a moment. What do you want to do? And I sat in that office and thought about it honestly, maybe for the first time. I want it to stop, I said. I want my granddaughter to know who I was, and I want my son to have to look at it. Not hear about it, look at it. Diane wrote something down. Then we're not going to court, she said. Courts are for money. This isn't about money. The following Saturday morning, Vanessa came into the kitchen carrying a notebook. Good news, she announced. I looked up from the newspaper. What happened? I booked the 4th of July barbecue. Booked? She grinned. My family, your family, the neighbors, everybody. I folded the paper in half. That sounds ambitious. It'll be perfect. She flipped a page. Oh, and I already told everyone the lawyer might stop by. I set the paper down. The lawyer? Yes. She smiled with real confidence. The confidence of a woman who has never once been told no in a way that stuck. We'll finally get the paperwork handled while everyone's together. Bradley froze halfway through pouring his coffee. Vanessa. She ignored him. It just makes sense. She looked back at me. I mean, once the house is officially in our names, we can really start renovating. Silence. She mistook it for agreement. They always do. That is the one reliable weakness of people like my daughter-in-law. They cannot tell the difference between a man agreeing with them and a man deciding something. So I'll tell everyone to expect good news, she said. I folded my newspaper the rest of the way, and I smiled. I think that's an excellent idea, I said. She beamed and went to write it in her notebook. Bradley looked from her to me, and something in my face must have unsettled him, because for the first time in weeks, for the first time since the night he stood on my porch with a suitcase in his hand, my son looked afraid. I called Diane from the truck. She's invited you to a barbecue, I said. There was a pause on the line, and then Diane Fletcher, attorney at law, 31 years at the bar, said a word I will not repeat, and then she said, Walter, she's invited us to a barbecue. That night I couldn't sleep, so I went and sat on the back patio in the dark. Around midnight the sliding door opened behind me. It was Lily, bare feet rabbit under her arm. I heard the door, she said. Couldn't sleep either. She sat down on the step beside me. Not touching, just close. We looked at the yard for a while. There was a moon. Grandpa, she said, are you mad at my mom? I have been asked a great many hard questions in my life. Some of them by a woman with 6 months to live. That one was harder. No, I said. I'm sad at your mom. Lily thought about that for a while, the way children do, seriously, like it's arithmetic. That's worse, she said. I looked at my granddaughter. Yeah, I said. It is. She leaned over then and put her head against my arm, and we sat there in my backyard on a kumapa tree in the dark. And I thought, whatever happens on the 4th of July, this child has to still be able to walk into this house afterward. Whatever I do, it has to leave a door open for her. That was the only rule I made for myself. Everything else I let the facts handle. The 4th of July arrived hot enough to make the air shimmer over the driveway. By 9 that morning, Vanessa had taken over my kitchen, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. Hot dogs on the left side of the grill, she called to Bradley. Burgers on the right, desserts on the island. She turned and saw me carrying a folding table out of the garage. Oh, Walter, could you wipe these down before everyone gets here? I looked at the table, then at her. Sure, I said. She smiled, satisfied, and walked off before I'd even set it down. Gerald had been pretending to trim the hedge along the property line for about 10 minutes. He caught my eye. You all right? He asked quietly. I will be. He nodded once. That's all I needed to hear. Around noon, the first cars started arriving. My sister Carol brought potato salad in the same cracked Tupperware. She's been bringing potato salad in since the Reagan administration. My cousin Tom showed up with 2 coolers of soda, and immediately began telling everyone about his knee. Kids ran through the backyard with little flags. Somebody set up a speaker and played the kind of music that makes older people say, "Now this was music." For a while it almost felt like the gatherings Eleanor used to host. Almost. Then Vanessa started giving tours. "Our kitchen gets amazing morning light," she told one couple, steering them by the elbow. She pointed at the den. "We're thinking of opening this wall up after the paperwork's finished." After the paperwork. Nobody corrected her. Nobody knew to. That's the thing about a lie told confidently in a room full of decent people. Everyone assumes somebody else has the facts. I watched Bradley at the grill, flipping burgers, saying little. He kept glancing at me. Every time our eyes met, he looked away. And there was a burger on that grill going quietly to charcoal, because a grown man could not keep his mind on his hands. Lily found me by the fence. She was wearing a red dress somebody had put her in, and she had a smear of ketchup on her cheek, and she leaned against my leg the way children do when a party has gotten too big around them. "There's too many people," she said. "There sure are. Can I stay by you? You can stay by me all day," I said. Gerald wandered over with 2 paper plates. "Mind if I steal a burger before the crowd does?" "Go ahead." He leaned against the fence on my other side. Lily on one side, Gerald on the other, a child and an old cop. It occurs to me now that those were the 2 people in that yard I trusted completely. And neither of them had said a word about what was coming, because one didn't know and the other didn't need to. "You nervous?" Gerald asked low. "A little." "Good. You should be." Then his face went serious under the gray mustache. "But you're doing the right thing, Walter. I've watched a lot of men do the wrong thing to keep a party pleasant. It never once made the party worth keeping." At 1:30, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Diane Fletcher stepped out, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Vanessa saw her before anyone. She clapped her hands together and hurried across the yard. "Oh, perfect, Diane. We're so glad you could make it." Diane smiled politely. "Good afternoon." Vanessa turned to the crowd near the patio, raising her voice just enough. "This is wonderful timing. We can finally get the paperwork signed before dessert." Several relatives turned. My sister Carol frowned. "Paperwork?" Vanessa laughed, light and social. "Oh, nothing exciting. Walter's decided it's time to transfer the house." Bradley's shoulders went rigid. "Vanessa, just her name, low. A last exit offered and not taken." She kept going. "It'll save everyone trouble later." She reached into a kitchen drawer through the open patio door and came back holding a brand new box of pens. "I even bought these." She held one out to me across the patio table. The whole backyard had drifted in without quite meaning to. That's the gravity of a moment. People feel it before they understand it. Carol, Tom, Gerald, the neighbors, Lily still against my leg, and Bradley 10 feet back holding a spatula like a man holding the last solid object in a flood. "Whenever you're ready," Vanessa said. I looked at the pen. I looked at my daughter-in-law. "We won't be needing your pen," I said. She blinked. "What?" I said, "We won't be needing your pen." The backyard went quiet. Not all at once, in a ring, spreading outward from the patio table, the way still water goes when you set something heavy on the surface. Even the children seemed to move farther off. Somebody turned the music down without being asked. Diane opened her portfolio. "Since there seems to have been a misunderstanding," she said, and her voice was the calmest thing in that yard, "Mr. Hargrove has asked me to clarify the ownership of this property." Vanessa's smile was still on her face, but it had stopped meaning anything. "The home was placed into an irrevocable trust," Diane continued, "shortly after Mrs. Hargrove passed away 4 years ago." Vanessa frowned. "What does that have to do with today?" "It means," Diane said evenly, "that Mr. Hargrove does not personally own this house. He cannot transfer it. Neither can anyone else. The trust owns the property. Mr. Hargrove holds the absolute right to live here for the rest of his life. He cannot be moved. He cannot be pressured out, and the house cannot be sold out from under him. Not by petition, not by persuasion, and not by paperwork produced at a barbecue." Several relatives exchanged looks. Tom set his soda down on the arm of a lawn chair. Vanessa looked at Bradley. Bradley looked at the ground. Diane removed several photographs from the folder and began, without hurry, to lay them on the patio table. "Over the past several weeks," she said, "Mr. Hargrove has asked me to add protections against attempts to pressure, manipulate, or coerce changes to his estate. I'd like to show why those protections became necessary." She set down the first photograph. Eleanor's blue recliner under a tarp, wedged behind storage bins in the garage. Gerald looked away. He'd known that chair too. She set down another, the refrigerator. Our family photographs shoved to the margins. And in the dead center, the laminated sheet. Breakfast ready by 6 a.m. Bathrooms cleaned every night. Shirts pressed, dresses hung, not folded. Nobody laughed. In my whole life I have never heard a backyard so quiet on the 4th of July. Carol read the sheet from where she stood, and her hand went to her mouth. She had known Eleanor for 50 years. She knew exactly whose refrigerator that was. Diane laid down copies of text messages, certain lines marked in yellow. This place needs to stop feeling like your dad's house. We need him to sign before he changes his mind. Just somewhere smaller. This is completely out of context, Vanessa said. Her voice had climbed half a step. Diane did not argue. She never argued once that whole afternoon. And I have come to think that is the most frightening thing a person can do to a liar. Simply decline to fight and produce the next page. Then perhaps this will help with context, she said. She laid down the invoices, furniture delivered to my address, and then the last document, the one Denise Alvarado had signed her name to. This is a comparative market analysis, Diane said, prepared by a licensed real estate agent at the request of Mrs. Hargrove 3 weeks after she moved into this house. She represented to the agent that Mr. Hargrove had authorized the valuation because he was, and I'm quoting the agent's written statement, getting to that stage. Diane looked up once and then back down. The analysis includes an estimated timeline for a probate sale. Probate. I'll let the family understand what that word requires. My cousin Tom said it out loud slowly, because somebody had to. Probate's after somebody dies. The silence that came down then was a different kind. The first silence had been shock. This one had a floor under it. This one was everybody in that yard arriving, at the same moment, at the same understanding, and being unable to look at the person standing at the center of it. You already planned renovations, Tom said. He wasn't asking. Vanessa opened her mouth, nothing came out. And then Gerald spoke from beside me in the flat, even voice of a man who spent 32 years saying hard things in kitchens exactly like mine. That chair, he said, nodding at the photograph, belonged to Eleanor. He wasn't talking about furniture. Everybody knew it. Carol wiped a tear off her cheek with the back of her wrist and didn't bother to hide it. And then my son lifted his head. Bradley set the spatula down on the edge of the grill. He looked at the photograph of his mother's chair. He looked toward the garage where the real chair still sat under its tarp. He looked at me. His face came apart. Not gracefully. A grown man's face has further to fall. His voice cracked in half. Nobody moved. Nobody helped him. Some things a man has to carry across the room by himself. I knew. Vanessa turned on him fast. Bradley. I knew she wanted the house. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, and he was crying now, openly the way he had at his mother's funeral. And I felt my own chest give way at the sound of it because a father never stops hearing that particular sound. I kept telling myself it would never go that far, that I'd stop it before. He shook his head. I was wrong. I was wrong about all of it. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Don't, he gently took her hand off his arm. And his voice, when it came back, was steadier than I had heard it in months. No, he said. Dad deserves to hear it. I should have stopped it the first night, when she handed you those rules. When she moved Mom's chair. When that man asked if you were the handyman and I stood there and said nothing. His eyes filled again, my own father. And I said nothing. Vanessa stared at him as though she'd never seen him before in her life. You're really doing this? Bradley answered without looking at her. Yes, and for the first time in 4 months, for the first time, if I am honest, in far longer than that, I saw my son. Not the frightened husband, not the man behind the silence. My son, the one Eleanor raised, the one she'd been afraid the world would find a way to use. Diane quietly closed her folder. My part is finished, she said, but mine wasn't. I took one slow step forward and looked at the dozens of people standing in my backyard. The only sound was the soft hiss of the grill, where a couple of burgers had gone past saving. I had imagined this moment more times than I care to admit. In every version of it, I thought I'd feel victorious. I didn't. Mostly I felt tired. I appreciate everyone coming today, I said quietly. But I think we all know this barbecue stopped being about hamburgers a while ago. A few nervous laughs. They died fast. I turned to Bradley. When your mother was dying, I said, she worried about one thing more than any other. He lowered his head. It wasn't the house. It wasn't money. She was worried you'd forget what kind of man she raised you to be. My own voice was not as steady as I wanted it. She told her best friend she was afraid somebody would find the soft place in you and press on it, and that I would let it happen, because I loved you and because I'd call it patience. His shoulders shook. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you are. I walked to the patio table where Diane's folder still lay, and I picked up the laminated sheet. The edges were still stiff and smooth. 4 months in my kitchen and it hadn't so much as curled. I held it up. You want to know what bothered me most about this? Vanessa folded her arms, but she stayed quiet. There was nothing left to say, and some part of her had finally understood that. It wasn't the breakfast. It wasn't the bathrooms. It wasn't the shirts. I looked directly at my son. It was that my own boy stood in his mother's living room, while someone handed his father a set of instructions on how to live inside the house his parents spent 34 years paying for, and he decided it was easier to let it happen. Bradley covered his face with one hand. I know. No, I said gently, I don't think you do. Not yet, but you're going to. I set the sheet back down on the table. People ask how families fall apart, I said, and I wasn't only talking to Bradley now. I was talking to the whole yard, to Carol and Tom and the neighbors, and though she couldn't follow all of it, to a 7-year-old in a red dress holding a rabbit. They picture one terrible day, one fight, one betrayal big enough to explain everything. I shook my head slowly. It almost never happens that way. It happens one quiet compromise at a time, one apology you never make, one disrespect you decide not to challenge because you're tired, or because it's a holiday, or because the person doing it is smiling. One silence, and then another silence, until one morning you're standing in your own kitchen, asking permission to be there. And you can't for the life of you remember which small moment was the one where you should have said, no. Gerald looked down at his boots. Carol nodded, crying without sound. Even Vanessa at last could not lift her eyes. And then she spoke, and her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I never wanted to hurt you. What? I said, not cruelly. I wanted her to hear herself. I thought families were supposed to help each other. She was not performing now. Whatever else that woman was, in that moment she was telling the truth, which made it worse and also, strangely, made it possible to stay in the same yard as her. I thought, if we were going to inherit the house someday anyway, then making it work for us now just made sense. I nodded slowly. There it is. Nobody interrupted. You weren't waiting for an inheritance, I said. You were living inside one, while the person it belonged to was still making your daughter's breakfast. She opened her mouth, then she closed it. There was nothing to defend. Bradley stepped closer, and it came out of him in a rush. The way a thing comes out when a man has been holding the door on it with his whole body. I've got credit card debt. He looked around at his family, at all of them. A lot of it. I never told anybody because I was ashamed. I kept believing one more promotion would fix it. It didn't. Then Vanessa lost 2 clients, and we started borrowing, and then borrowing more. And I told myself moving here would be temporary. His voice broke clean through. And every single time I should have told her no, about the chair, about the rules, about all of it, I didn't. Because I needed somewhere to land, and Dad's house was there, and he's always there, and I used that. I used you being a good man against you. I said nothing for a moment. I failed you, he said. I took a breath. The whole yard waited on it. I know life can back a man into a corner, I said. I've been broke. I worked double shifts. I skipped vacations. Your mother and I ate peanut butter for a week 1 February, so the mortgage on this house would clear. A few of the older relatives smiled at that, the sad way you smile at a true thing. We did what we had to do. But we never once solved a problem of our own by taking away somebody else's peace. That was the line. Your mother drew it, and I kept it, and it is the only inheritance that ever mattered in this family. And somewhere along the way, son, you set it down. Bradley nodded through the tears. No, you didn't. You never did. I reached back through the open garage door. Earlier that morning, before any of them were awake, I had set something just inside it, a faded red metal toolbox. The same one I carried for nearly 30 years as a union electrician, the handle worn smooth by my own hand. The corners scratched down to bare metal. Inside, my old lineman's pliers, the wire strippers, the good screwdrivers, and the tape measure Eleanor bought me for our 20th anniversary because, she said, I was forever borrowing everyone else's. I carried it over and held it out to my son. He stared at it. Dad, take it. He took it carefully with both hands, the way Vanessa had once handed me a set of rules. I don't understand, he said. I know you don't. I kept my hand on the lid a moment. This toolbox built everything that ever mattered in my life. My trade. This house, the years your mother and I had in it. I looked him in the eye. I'm not giving you a house, Bradley. I'll never give you this house. It isn't mine to give. And even if it were, I wouldn't. And someday you'll thank me for that. I'm giving you a chance. When you've built something again with your own two hands, anything, it doesn't have to be big. You come back here and you have dinner with your father. My son began to cry the way a grown man cries only a few times in his life, not loud. Not for anyone. Just the crying a man does when he finally stops pretending. Vanessa looked at him, then at me. And she said, barely above a whisper, I don't deserve your kindness. I answered her honestly, because she had finally earned honesty. No, I said, you don't. The yard was silent. But kindness isn't the same thing as surrender, I said. I learned that too late to save myself 4 bad months. Maybe you'll learn it faster. Diane allowed herself a small smile. Gerald tipped his cap an inch. I looked at the two of them, my son and his wife, standing in the wreckage of the plan they'd carried onto my porch 4 months earlier. You have 7 days, I said. Bradley nodded at once. We'll go, and I'll help with the security deposit on a place. A real one. Vanessa looked up, startled past her own shame. Why would you do that? Because I want you to leave, I said. Not to fail. There's a difference. It's the whole difference, actually. I've spent 4 months learning it. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since the night she'd stood under my porch light, holding a leather tote like a woman arriving to take a position. For the first time she looked genuinely, simply ashamed. Not caught, ashamed. There is a world between the two, and I watched her cross it, right there in my backyard, on the 4th of July. The moving truck came the following Saturday. Bradley carried more boxes than anyone. He worked in the July heat until his shirt was soaked through, and he did not ask for help. And when Tom offered anyway, he shook his head and said he wanted to do it himself, and I understood that he was not talking about the boxes. Vanessa barely spoke. She was civil to me and careful, and she kept Lily close. And once, loading a box into the truck, she stopped and looked back at the house for a long moment, with an expression I couldn't read and didn't try to. Before they left, Bradley walked into the garage. A few minutes later, he came out carrying his mother's recliner. He didn't say anything. He carried it in through the front door and set it down exactly where it had always been, beside the front window, where the afternoon sun reaches it around 4 o'clock, the way Eleanor liked, because she said a chair should be where the light finds it, not where it's out of the way. He stood looking at it a moment, then he turned to me. I'm sorry, Dad. I know. He nodded once. And then he did something I wasn't ready for. He crossed the room, and he put his arms around me, the way he hadn't since the funeral. And my 36-year-old son held on to his father in the middle of a half-empty living room, and neither of us said a word, because there wasn't a word that would have improved it. Then he left. Lily was the last one out. She came and stood in front of me in her sneakers, holding her rabbit, and she looked up with her mother's face and her father's eyes. Are you still the grandpa? She asked. I got down as far as my knees would let me, which is not as far as it used to be. I will always be the grandpa, I said. That one nobody can move to the garage, you understand me? She thought about it. Then she nodded, very seriously. And she hugged me around the neck hard enough that I felt it in my back for 2 days, and was grateful for every hour of it. Your house does smell like cookies, she whispered. A little. Then she ran to the truck. 3 months passed. The house was quiet again, properly quiet, the good kind, my own quiet. Eleanor's chair sat in its window. The family pictures went back where they belonged. Front and center, the laminated sheet long gone into the trash where it had wanted to keep me. One Sunday afternoon there was a knock at the door. It was Bradley, alone. He held a small toolbox in one hand, a cheap one, new, the kind you buy at the hardware store when you're starting over. I fixed the loose porch light, he said. I noticed it on the way in. He shifted his feet. I got a second job, evenings. It's nothing much yet, but it's mine, and he stopped. I was wondering if you wanted company for dinner. I looked at my son on the porch, where he'd stood 4 months earlier, with 2 suitcases and a stranger's plan. I stepped aside. I've got enough meatloaf for 2, I said. He laughed, and it caught in his throat. Mom would have approved. Mom would have told us we were both being stubborn, and made us apologize before the food got cold. Definitely. We ate at the old oak table. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. Some things heal loud. with speeches and tears in a backyard full of relatives. And some things heal quiet, at a kitchen table over meatloaf, between two men who have finally run out of pretending. I've come to think the quiet kind lasts longer. About 6 months after that, a handwritten letter arrived from Vanessa. No excuses, no blame, just an apology. She wrote that she had spent a long time thinking, and that she had confused three pairs of things her whole life and only now begun to tell them apart. Planning for control, efficiency for respect, and helping for entitlement. She said she was in counseling. She said Lily talked about me. She said she was not asking for anything. And she wasn't. There was nothing in that letter reaching for a single thing. And that absence was how I knew it was real. I didn't rush to answer. Trust runs on a slower clock than forgiveness. That is one of the truest things I know, and nobody tells you when you're young. I forgave her long before I trusted her. And I am not certain, even now, that the second one ever fully arrived, and I have made my peace with that. Boundaries stayed exactly where they were. The trust never changed one word. But I wrote back. I told her I accepted her apology. I told her that her daughter was welcome in my house any day of her life, and I meant it. These days Eleanor's recliner sits beside the living room window where the afternoon light finds it. The family photographs are back where they belong. Bradley comes over on Saturdays sometimes. We fix small things around the house, a hinge, a running toilet, the eternal war with the gutters. Sometimes we don't fix anything at all. Sometimes we just sit with coffee and watch the neighborhood go by, and Lily comes in the summers. And she is learning to use the tape measure Eleanor gave me, and she is better at it already than her grandfather. Now I want to say something to you directly, because I promised you at the start that I'd stay honest all the way to the end. And this is the part I most need you to hear. I spent a long time believing that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family. That if I just absorbed enough, adjusted enough, stayed quiet enough, love would hold. I was wrong. What I was doing wasn't love, it was fear wearing love's coat. Real love, the kind Eleanor had, the kind that raised a good boy even if it couldn't keep him from a weak season. Real love is willing to be disliked in the short run to be trusted in the long one. It draws a line not to punish, but because a line is the only thing a person can hold on to in the dark. My silence didn't protect my son. It taught him that the man who loved him most could be moved to the garage, and it very nearly taught my granddaughter the same lesson about herself. If you are older and you are being made to feel like a guest in the life you built, hear me. Growing old does not mean handing over your voice. It does not mean trading your dignity for a quiet house. The people who truly love you do not need you to disappear an inch at a time to prove it. And the ones who do need that were never loving you. They were managing you, and there is all the difference in the world. And if you are younger, and there is someone in your life whose kindness you have started to spend, like it's yours, a parent, a grandparent, anyone who keeps saying yes when they should be free to say no, go and find them while you still can. Fix their porch light. Bring the chair back in from the garage. Say the 8 words that take 3 seconds. That's my dad, this is his house. You do not get those 3 seconds back. I know a man who is still doing the arithmetic on his. The kindest thing you can ever do for the people you love is not to give them everything they ask for. It is to show them, clearly and without cruelty, where the line is, and then to stand on it with the door still open, waiting for them to come back as their better selves. That is not revenge. I told you at the start it wasn't, and I've kept my word. Revenge closes a door. What I did left one open. My son walks through it every Saturday. If this story found you today, if you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, then you already understand it better than I could ever explain it. And you are not alone in it. I would be honored to hear what you learned and what you carry down in the comments. I read everyone. And if this meant something to you, stay a while. Come along with me on this channel, where we sit with these stories together and try to grow a little wiser and a little kinder for having told them. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take good care of the people who built the rooms you're standing in. This story was written and told by a human being. The names, the places, the small details have been changed to protect real people and their privacy. And some moments have been shaped for the telling, the way any honest storyteller shapes a thing to carry it to you whole. But the truth underneath it, the chair, the silence, the 3 seconds, the line a person finally has to draw, that truth is real and it is mine. And I have handed it to you the way my wife once handed things to me. with both hands, and the hope that you'll do something good with it.